What's the deal with Stepmania? Hey guys, welcome back. So I wanted to talk about Stepmania and what it is. We're going to talk a little bit about code and stuff. I am a programmer, but nothing related to this or the type of programming that they do in Stepmania. I am not technically qualified. So I'm an unqualified outsider who doesn't have all of the details, who's about to spout opinions for 10 minutes. So sorry in advance. Stepmania is an open source dance simulation game. It's heavily inspired by Dance Dance Revolution. You can almost think of it like an open source DDR clone. Unlike DDR, a huge portion of its users play with devices other than dance pads, like keyboards. If you didn't know, I'm in the camp of people that use dance pads. I don't ever play on the keyboard. An older version of Stepmania was forked and turned into the software behind In the Groove. In the Groove was not open source. Another project later called OpenITG tried to make an open source version of In the Groove. For a long time, pad players were using RealITG, OpenITG, or Stepmania 3.95. All of them are, from what I can tell, they're closely related. But then Stepmania 5 came out, which brought a bunch of new features and fixes and became the de facto standard for most of the community. There was new Lewis stuff, there was some stuff that changed that broke some charts like the gimmick charts. There were changes in the way that scripts were loaded and the way things were organized, and it introduced USB profiles. The latest and greatest version of Stepmania 5 is Stepmania 5.1 Beta 2. You can find it here on the GitHub Stepmania page under releases. Now, this is not even linked from the main Stepmania website. If you install it, you might run into like missing DLL errors, and the Mac build doesn't even work on like Catalina. Because of this, many folks distribute their own version of 5.1 Beta 2 that they build themselves. Din has a really good one for Windows, and I've been using that, and it's great. Also, if you're an arcade user, you might have heard about TJ's system image. Well, that's running 5.1 Beta 2 as well. So until very recently, 5.1 Beta 2 was the standard and what most new users were recommended to install. But the site didn't link to it and it was confusing to find and install, so it wasn't great for end users to get started. Enter Stepmania 5.3 or Project Outfox or Project Moondance by Team Rizu or the Project Outfox team. I'm sure there's some distinguishing between all these different phrases, but they're all kind of mashed together in my mind. What the hell happened to 5.2? I don't know. But this seemingly popped out of nowhere. It had a kick-ass website. It has a super active Discord with tons of people in it. And dare I say, a rather attractive anime furry mascot.
So hot. Oh.
It makes some big talk about performance improvements, and it lives up to it. It's not uncommon to see huge frame rate increases switching from 5.1 to 5.3. On my setup, which has a 10700K and a 2060 Super, I run every setting maxed out and I run at 1440p and I get upwards of 1000 FPS. Totally unnecessary and actually causes a lot of coil whine, but hey, YOLO. But remember how Stepmania was open source? 5.3 is closed source, temporarily. There was a bit of drama a while ago where Simply Love, a popular theme for Stepmania 5, was blocking 5.3 users from using their theme. It was actually just a one-line code change. You'd have to go in and comment out that check. And it has since been removed. You now can use mainline Simply Love with Stepmania 5.3, no problem. But there's this history behind, this tug of war between the Simply Love folks and others in the community, and 5.3 being closed source. You can see some of that discussion in this GitHub pull request. It's kind of interesting if you're into this sort of thing. Yeah, I want to focus on this one area where one of the Outfox devs summarized things. In short, Outfox 5.3 will be merged back into the Stepmania repo and will replace 5.1 as the main branch. And this will be done for free, like the way Eterna are doing things. Sounds great. But we'll come back to that later. Now, they also have a statement on their frequently asked questions. So, will Project Outfox go open source? Yes. And then there's a quote that explains more. But essentially, they're saying that they wanted to keep it closed source while they're in this development process where things are kind of hectic and they don't want a lot of outside scrutiny and just extra churn from peering eyes and comments and stuff like that. I might be missing some of the nuances, but that's what I took away from what they've said. So, in general, this team that's working on this new branch of what's going to become the new mainline Stepmania, they operate as their own little island without a lot of collaboration or visibility from others. We don't know when they'll make it open source. There is no timeline that we know about.
Into a goblin's nest, kissing goblins, goblin vomit.
But while they never indicated that they would do this, it is possible for them to not make it open source. And of course, it would be impossible if they just made it open source to begin with or did so now. So a lot of people really don't like the closed source nature of this. Some people don't want to use it or recommend it pretty much for that reason. I mean, I've heard some people say like, yeah, what if there's hidden malware in it or something like that. I personally never really felt that way. Um, I didn't really care about them keeping their cards close to their chest or whatever you want to say. From what I was seeing, they were planning on opening things up at the end and merging everything back. So who cares? So I've been using 5.3 for a long while now. And honestly, I loved it. It's extremely performant. It's super easy to install. The community and developers were easy to talk to and answered all the questions that I had. And I love the activity around it. It really seemed like this was the new next thing in the life of Stepmania. I recommended it to anyone. Anyone who asked me like how do I get set up or get started doing this? It was always, start by installing 5.3. But now I feel a little differently. And honestly, it's for a very personal reason. I was on Team 5.3. I was on the boat, feeling good with everybody, looking at all the haters from a distance who didn't want to use it because they thought it might have a Dogecoin miner or whatever. But I feel like at some point I kind of got pushed off that boat. In short, I clashed with a couple of the developers, and it left a sour taste in my mouth. Not all of them, though. I mean, there's a lot of people working on this, and one of them in particular, Sheepy Chris, is like, he's one of the realest dudes I know. I love that guy. I don't want to go into specifics or make this video just about this, but personally, I got this impression that there's a culture of seeking out criticism, returning it to whip up the community into a frenzy, ruminating over it, and then blowing up in a very public way. Kind of like going out of their way to find stuff to get offended by so they can be a victim. There's some resistance to criticism that I saw, but in general, there are just a couple folks there who are, rude and abrasive and a little bit demeaning and just kind of lack the respect towards other people. Like I said, I don't want to give specific examples, but there are general things like, finger pointing at other people or past developers of Stepmania and just, seems like you're putting other people down. Their behavior isn't the end of the world, and, I'm a big boy, and people are definitely redeemable. But, yeah, I mean, I don't want to rely on software where the maintainers make me feel like shit if I ask them for help. Respect is huge in my book. And if you do something great, but make people feel like shit at the same time, I'll just pass on your great stuff and use something else. Just to tone down before anyone grabs their digital pitchforks, apologies were made. This is all resolved. People have bad days. They get overworked. Life happens and tempers get lost. I've lost my temper once or 100 times before. Not a big deal. But even so, at the same time the apology happened, they were pointing the blame in another community and implying they were harassing and provoking them. I don't know. All I can say is it felt like I was dealing with an ex-girlfriend who was like super defensive, and why would I want to deal with that for a video game? So apart from Dom's fifis getting hurt, the goal of this project are really different than 5.1, and personally it's different than the way I use Stepmania, which is for 4-panel on pad. They are super focused on introducing new game modes, things like Taiko or Techno Motion, Pump It Up, among many others. There's a big portion of this that's readying the software for this online platform. The vibe I get is kind of like Groove Stats, but way more modern and more encompassing. Probably would have ranking of these other game modes, but other online features as well. In general, the software 5.3 is not very stable. And yeah, that should be expected. It's in alpha. Yeah, I'm a busy man and I don't want to have to fix this or that when I upgrade. I just want to grill. I mean, I just want to dance, man. The way it was breaking for me between upgrades was super confusing and subtle. And it was making me think that my pads were broken or there was something wrong in my system. A couple examples. There was one build where I just started getting I couldn't pass the beginning of a song. I couldn't figure out why. I played it over and over again, and I was just missing, and I thought my pads were broken. But it turned out that there were micro holds, and there were just little tiny holds there, and they were just calculating as misses in the new version or the version that I was using. There was another instance where rate mods were calculating incorrectly. So I was rate modding like a 150 BPM song to like 170 BPM, and it felt like 220. And I couldn't like explain this or show anybody this. I was just like, guys, I feel like I'm having a stroke, or I can't play, or there's something wrong with my system and I don't know why. And eventually, to deal with these issues and to like properly explain them to others, I had to like take side by side videos and do frame by frame comparisons, and like it was a huge hassle. Where I left is that I shouldn't be using alpha software for my setup. I want something that's reliable, and that's on me. Lastly, while the performance is nice, really nice, I don't need 1,000 plus FPS. I seem to get like 700 plus FPS on 5.1, and I'm using 144 hertz refresh rate, so yeah, good enough. So I spent a little bit of time to see if I could do like a split setup where I'd have 5.1 and 5.3, and I could maybe go in between them. Trying to figure out how to turn on symlinks on Windows. I don't know what I'm gonna do yet. At this point, I have them both installed, and the profiles are gonna start diverging. So in my mind now, it's not as clear cut as it was before, when 5.3 was taking over Stepmania and is becoming the new version of 5.1. The future of Stepmania is kind of uncertain. The developers have said that they aren't planning to merge back anymore. From what I understand, they're still planning on becoming open source, but they're not going to merge back to Stepmania mainline. At the same time, not much active work is happening on 5.1 because 5.3 has been declared the successor. There's nobody really doing a ton of bug fixes or adding features there because there's this other team that has said, no, no, we're doing it over here. It's just we're not showing anyone the code. So when or if Stepmania 5.3 becomes open source, at that time it would have been closed source the entire time. I mean, for more than a year, or I don't know how long it's been, but it's been a while, and it's going to be a while, I think. Is anyone else going to want to work and contribute to this code base? I hope so. Who knows? Maybe it's built in a way that might make it hard for outsiders to contribute to it. I don't even know what that means. Poor documentation or specialized tools, or I don't know. 5.1 is still heavily used right now, and it may continue to live on in some form. At this point, I don't see that purely as a bad thing. This is why open source stuff is so cool. If you don't like the way something is headed, or you just want to run something differently, you can either fork something yourself or adopt somebody else's fork. This happened very recently and publicly with Audacity. Audacity introduced some telemetrics that the community wasn't happy with, and they forked it and removed it. The focus of 5.3 is much more broad than the way I use Stepmania. That said, there's design considerations and compatibility things and new features that others might care about that I don't necessarily care about. Is it crazy to think that we'd maybe have a fork that's focused squarely on 4-panel or even pad players? I don't know. It might not be the best idea. I'm just saying I don't think it's crazy. So there you have it. Stepmania is in a very weird place right now. 5.1 Beta 2 is still used a ton. It's open source, it's stable, it works well, but it's not even linked on the Stepmania website, and it's hard to get up and running for new users. 5.3 is new and unstable. The devs are kind of abrasive, but it's extremely performant and has a super user-friendly website. So which version of Stepmania should you pick? I'd probably recommend anyone who has a super low-end system to run 5.3 because the performance is so great. But like your operating system, your text editor, or any other software, you have to decide which software you want to use. How important is it for you to use software that's open source? How stable do you need things to be? Do you like getting publicly ass blasted by the development team? Do you want some of these new features that only 5.3 has? So that's really all I wanted to say. I just wanted to talk about Stepmania and the two forks and the weird world we're in right now. But I'd like to hear from you guys. What are you using? Did you have 5.1? Did you switch to 5.3? Was that experience good for you? Are you a keyboard player? Are you using some of these new game modes? And are you excited about the web services? Let me know, because there is a whole other side to this whole world that I am not a part of. So with that, I'll see you next time.